everyone, how are you all doing? Welcome to the weekly live, welcome to Tarriffs, yay! Okay, let me just go ahead and pop this open over here, get chat all caught up because I see chat is bumping off. As usual, by the way, this is the usual weekly live with adjustments, which means it's still a Q&A. Ask whatever you want and whatever you want, whatever you want, whether it's about Tarriffs, whether it's something else. This is still a regular Q&A. Just the guided topic of conversation today is going to be Tarriffs. Let me just mute this over here because I don't want that going off. Let me open up chat, get this going. Yeah, and if you want the reason why, because it happened yesterday. We have our liberation tariffs over here, and it's kind of big news because it heavily affects the board game space in a way that is very, 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 very bad. Although, of course, there is conjecture as to the many possible reasons they could also go away. But before we even get to that, there's the nature of the fact that this keeps happening on again, off again, it's up here, it's down here, whether they go away or not, doesn't stop the fact that there's an impact already and continuously until there's like a nice 6 months to a year of calm. No board game creator can actually operate with any degree of knowledge because of the chaos. So even if they immediately go away tomorrow, there's still an impact. But we'll get to all of that soon. First, let's catch up on chat. Successful, Alex livestream, yes indeed. Chocobo, this will be an interesting topic. To an extent, I do want to caution all of you that I am not a publisher. I have spoken to a lot of publishers about this. I know a lot of what's going on. I've read all the articles from various publishers. I've gotten different viewpoints from those who think it's very doom and gloom to those who think it's less doom and gloom. To be fair, all those viewpoints were before the additional 34% tariffs that just went up yesterday, so I need updated viewpoints. But I am well informed, but I'm not a publisher. So take all that into account when we talk about tariffs today, that I know a decent amount, I can approach it thoughtfully and reasonably, but I am not necessarily an expert on the subject. Hopefully that qualifies me to whatever degree. Well, not qualifies me, but informs you as to my qualifications and lack thereof. Chocobo. As in my FLGS yesterday, and tariffs have made product jump sharply. It's $15 per Pokemon booster pack, although the scalpers are also a factor. You mean the tariffs already jumped to 15? Like the previous tariffs made it jump to 15? Hola, Jose, we have Drone, the fate of an already paid Kickstarter. Yes, this is a tricky part. That's part of this is the chaos of crowdfunding, because, forget crowdfunding. The speed at which things are changing makes it so that retail or crowdfunding, you just can't plan around the unknown. It's an impossible problem to solve for. But the last time we had this problem was COVID, when we didn't have a choice. And so suddenly things that you had backed, 2 years ago were saying, hey, our containers just jumped from $4,000 to $27,000, and we have to charge for that because we can't eat the additional 4 containers, and therefore the additional $86,000, we can't just eat that, so we have to adjust prices. There was no choice then. There's no choice in that capacity at the time, but this time round, let me mute my phone. Let me mute my phone over here, 1 second. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Sorry, just muted my phone. Anyways, that was COVID, and we had no choice because it just was the nature of supply and demand and the lack of availability. This time round, we have the same kind of chaos going on where you can't run a crowdfunding campaign and have prices today based on the uncertainty of the future. Because you're kind of screwed if you do, screwed if you don't. If you charge more for something because of the tariffs, what if the tariffs go away? Do you refund that? The backers expected to be refunded? Like, how do you handle that kind of situation where you don't know what the price point is of the thing that you're trying to make and sell? It's impossible. Whether it goes away, whether it stays, it's just very, very complicated. Brian, good afternoon, happy campers. All the Maltese, good thing we didn't elect a lady with a weird laugh. Re-electing Trump was definitely the right thing to do. I kind of want a shirt. I kind of want a shirt that says that. Good thing we didn't elect the lady with the weird laugh. I think that's a funny, because this conversation inherently will get a little political to an extent. I don't see a way around it. I don't love getting political, but I also don't like shying away from things. So, again, another disclaimer. If I offend you, I apologize. If I disagree with you, I guess I don't apologize for disagreeing with you. I guess the way I put it is, whatever political stance you have, I may or may not share that. I often consider myself centrist, but that means that I probably bother people on both sides. What I will ask is that if you like me in X number of capacities, hopefully the fact that we disagree on a certain capacity here doesn't change that from being the case. Meaning we should be able to have a reasonable disagreement, and we shouldn't resort to diminishing people to the single area we disagree with them on. Whatever that might be. I'm sure there's lots of areas that you and I disagree. You and I is obviously different for every single one of you, but I'm sure there's many areas where we disagree. And the question is, do we have more in common or more that sets us apart? There is a certain point with anyone where you're like, oh, that person is no longer a frame of reference for me because they're too far removed from who I am. But for other people, it should be, no, we align here, we don't align here, and we're adults and we can get along. But so some of this conversation will have political aspects to it. I'm not going to try to get too political for the sake of it, but I will touch upon politics just because of the nature of this conversation. Which brings us to, good thing we didn't elect the lady with the weird laugh. Yeah, I mean, I do think Kamala had a weird laugh. I do think it was creepy. I also think that is not a good reason to not elect somebody. I definitely, I've talked about this before in the past. I didn't vote either time. I'm a green card holder, but I was pro-Trump the first time round, and by the time it got to his re-election, which he lost, by that time I was anti him because I felt he was too polarizing for... I did feel he would disrupt the I don't know. I felt he would disrupt things, and he did to an extent. Now he's disrupting things in all kinds of ways I don't like, but it's too much of an issue for me personally. By the time we got to Kamala versus Trump, I prefer Kamala, personally speaking. I think that because of both my background, where I grew up more conservative, and also because I tend to be centrist, I do think I generally understand most sides as to why someone would vote. Like, I'm not in the camp of, like, how could you possibly elect Donald Trump? Or nor am I in the camp of, how could you consider Kamala? I'm in the camp of, no, I see and understand, and I have my personal preferences. I do think that a big part of the appeal, like, I do think it's an interesting conversation as to, and I talked about this in the past on previous live streams, as to, like, a lot of people who did support Trump did so for economic reasons. And it doesn't seem like it's going well economically right now. So, like, I do think that's an interesting question mark to have as to, and a conversation I was having with somebody else, and this is a conversation, if you are someone watching this who supports Trump, you don't need to say anything in chat, there's no blame on my end, I'm not here to judge, but what I would question, and this goes for any conversation in any capacity, but right now this is the conversation of the day, which is, in order to be intellectually honest with yourself, the main thing to ask yourself, and I was talking to, like, a friend last week about this, but the main thing to ask yourself is, if the Biden administration, or if Kamala was doing all the exact things that Trump was doing right now, would you be raging against how stupid it is and how they're destroying the country? Or would you be like, yeah, that makes sense? And then do you have the same approach with Trump? Meaning, like, consider whether your approaches are even or whether you're just following a leader, if that makes sense. Okay. Wait, what's happening here? Lauren, I can't believe I made it to the live stream. Lauren, welcome aboard. Every Thursday, this time, it's roughly every Thursday, and roughly this time. Unlimited Rabbit. Hooray, a stream about Mosaic Historic Civilization. Oh, tariffs, because there's taxes and tariffs in Mosaic Historic Civilization. There's an action called Tax and Tariff. You can take that card, I think it's called Tax and Tariff, it might be called Tariffs or something else, but I think it's Tax and Tariffs. Yeah, I love getting the tariffs in Mosaic. I hate getting the tariffs in real life. I'm glad I understood that, because I was confused. Keith, can't wait to have my Kickstarters all fail and ask for money, exciting times. Exactly, Keith. Jacob, oh, my toys are costing more. Aw. Jacob, are you serious right now? Are you, Jacob, okay, so, Jacob, here's the deal. Okay, let's just be a little direct with each other, okay? I don't know if that was a joke or not. I'm going to treat it as serious, but, like, no harm, no foul. If it's a joke, it's all cool, okay? If it's a joke, ignore everything I'm saying and pretend I'm talking to the person who's serious. If it's serious, I'm talking to you. And again, doesn't mean I don't like you. It just means that I want to be very real. All my toys are costing more. There are so many people who will buy less board games. Forget the toys. There are people left, right, and center. This entire industry is genuinely at risk as far as who will survive and who won't. The industry will survive. Board games will survive. How many people who have their jobs here have to wonder whether they will be able to sell enough board games this year because you have 25% of people backing fewer games or backing no games at all? If the market adjusts to a large degree, 54% tariffs, like, I mean, it's insane. The capacity for how much this is going to have a shift on the industry and for people's inability to actually have their job that they currently have. Like, sure, there are backers who might not be able to get a game because their toys are costing more. First of all, Lots of people can't afford to have the toys costing more. Lots of people can't. I mean, we live in an industry where stretch pay at this point is becoming more and more the norm to allow people to stretch their payment over multiple things. That means there's a lot of people, and some people do it because of affordability. Some people do it for budgeting reasons. There's lots of good reasons to do it. It's not just about not affordability, but nonetheless, the idea that someone might not be able to afford their toys that they liked having, I would like people to have nice things. I just think that's nice. I think we work a lot. We do a lot. Everyone's busy. Everyone's overworked. Everyone's stressed. Have their nice things. People should have their nice things. I'm not into people having their nice things cost more if they can't afford it, or having to get less nice things because they can't afford it, all because of some stupid economic policy that is not, it's like every economist out there thinks this policy is terrible. So yeah, are their toys are costing more? Absolutely. Like, I want to drop F-bombs right now. Absolutely it's a problem. And then of course is the people in the industry. The people in the industry whose jobs are at risk, livelihoods are at risk. This is like, all their toys are costing more? For what purpose? Like, if you have people dying on the street because of, let's say, COVID, and somebody else is like, my board game is more expensive, sure, that's a reasonable time to say that. I mean, even then I think is a better way to say it. But like, this is BS, man. This is complete BS. There's like, people are allowed to be upset that their toys are costing more for no good reason. Anyways, Jacob, I still like you. There's nothing personal. I get it. It might have been a joke. I have to address it nonetheless. Okay, Chris, hopefully we have a Trumper who can explain how this is all amazing, how we're winning, and why we should celebrate Liberation Day. Great, Chris, I'll take that role. I'm not a Trumper. I'll take that role. Because again, I think it is important to look at things from different sides. I think it is important to try to understand. And I have a very negative view of the tariffs. If that wasn't very clear after my last little rant over there, I have a very negative view of the tariffs. But I can sit there and say, well, here's the arguments for them. Okay, so let's give some arguments for the tariffs as to why they might happen, why they might be a good thing, okay? Because there's many arguments as to why they're a bad thing. I think they're a bad thing. But let's go through the good things. So, the first argument as to why tariffs can be a good thing is if it's being used as a negotiation tactic with other countries, because a lot of countries do have tariffs on US products to a higher degree than the US has on those products. That has been the status quo for a long time. So to a certain extent, if you're saying, well, hey, we are being taken advantage because China has tariffs on us and we have very low tariffs on them, we want them to lower their tariffs on us so we can sell more to China, so we just want fair play. So in theory, there is an argument to be made that these are effectively blackmail tariffs blackmail is the wrong word, leverage tariffs to say, hey, you want to tax us, we'll tax you. It's just how it goes, okay? You know, you want to lower your tax to us, we'll lower our tax to you. To a certain extent, there is a degree of quote-unquote fairness around that principle. There absolutely is. I think that's a very reasonable thing to say, okay, well, let's just approach this from a stance of fairness from other countries to us. Personally, I don't like that argument as much because of where the centers of manufacturing are and how well things are currently going and how poorly the market is reacting to this change. Meaning, I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about encouraging other countries to lower their tariffs so that we can sell more to those other countries. People buy more of the things that we make when you have those situations. I think it's an interesting argument. For me, it's kind of comes down to stamping your feet very loud and throwing things at the wall and breaking stuff because you don't like the fairness aspect. I think there is a way to try to achieve this degree of fairness. I don't think the ways we're doing it are in any way that way. So, but it is an interesting argument. Why should China have a 67% tariff on us and we have no tariff on them? Okay, well now we have 54% tariff. Okay, so there we go. So there's an interesting conversation there. Again, I disagree with it, but I can understand why somebody would view fairness as the primary goal and say, yeah, sure, we'll have to deal with hard times right now, but the end result is China's going to back down. Of course they're going to back down. Nobody wants this. So they're going to lower their tariffs. We'll lower our tariffs, and there's a whole bunch of much hullabaloo or whatever, but the end result is better economics for Americans. That's one potential argument. The other potential argument is bringing jobs back to America. This one's much trickier to defend in any way, because I think this one, you could make a defensible argument against tariffs if they were selectively applied with the correct warnings to specific industries. Meaning there are absolutely ways where you can apply tariffs in order to bring manufacturing back home. But it has to be done so if you want it to be actually beneficial as opposed to just hurting Americans, then you have to do so in a way that has a lot of warning and specific industries that is actually sustainable and achievable to do so. You can't just broadly blanket everything and be like, well, now it's going to work. No, it's not. Board games are not going to be cheaper in the US because of the tariffs now. They're still going to be cheaper in China, just much less affordable in general. So I think that argument I have a much harder time with, because even though, and I think you could make a defense that some jobs are being brought back to the US already because of tariffs. I think the two problems with that is, first of all, you have to pay attention to the news that you're actually listening to, because a lot of things being touted by this administration as being brought back here are things that were already in place before the tariffs, so it's not because of the tariffs. So you need to be mindful of your news sources in general. Highly recommend Ground News. I'm not sponsored by them, but they try to go for balanced news sources. But that's one aspect there. And then the second aspect is, so first be mindful of the news sources. And secondly is, even if there is a good, even if jobs were brought back because of these tariffs, it still doesn't mean that the way this is done is good. If I sit there and, if I shoot everything in front of me, maybe I hit one predator and I destroy a lot of buildings. It's still better to hit the one predator. It's a weird analogy. I'm not sure why I'm using this, but it's the first thing that came to mind. Point is that even if there's good because of these tariffs, you could still have achieved that good by targeting industries correctly as opposed to broad strokes. So those are in my opinion, the two main arguments that would be a legitimate argument for the benefit of tariffs, and my thoughts on those arguments. I have much more arguments against it, but I do think understanding both sides is an important part of things, and I think I understand some of these sides. Ali Guru, anyone up by game of hegemony? Yeah, no. Chris, multiple companies stateside have already stated layoffs across multiple industries due to these tariffs. Completely makes sense. Brian, the only time Alex is doing yoga. I don't do yoga. I have started working out finally. I've started working out. I've started working out. Not like a ton. Don't expect me to get buff or anything like that. But I've started exercising in a life where I didn't exercise at all. Okay. Brian, let's get into this, Alex. What's happening right now is not for short-term economics gains. What is being done right now is to establish a framework for how the future will be formed. Yes, that means short-term is going to cost more. Factories and production pipelines will need to be rebuilt, as will be all the offshore for decades. Yeah, completely agree to an extent, Brian. Again, I do think that if you speak to any practical economist, about this, the broad strokes of the tariffs are where that argument, the argument of stateside production, falls apart under the benefit of broad strokes tariffs. Specific tariffs, absolutely. I think there's a very strong argument to be like, hey, let's bring chip production to the U.S. Let's do it this way. Let's put tariffs on chips starting at this point doing that. There are great arguments to be made. The way it's being done is terrible for that. Jamil, I make $120K a year and I'm not paying $200 for a single board game. Definitely not paying $1,000 for all in. I think that's a reasonable stance. Danny, hello. Jacob Porter, assuming these companies will actually even build here. Yes, drone. Woke culture ruined Dems. Majority of Americans got fed up with it. Drone Explorer, you and I don't know each other that well, I assume. I think the term woke is, again, I grew up conservative. Trust me when I say I understand all the thought process. Anyone who has voted for Trump, anyone who uses the word woke, I guarantee you I understand where you're coming from. I guarantee you this. This is not like some pitch to be on your side. I grew up a certain way with certain thoughts, certain beliefs. I think there's also a recognition for the types of things that actually are relevant and helpful. I do think the terminology woke, I understand the thought process behind it and what people mean when they say it. I also think it's worth knowing that the term woke is kind of this broad slashing stroke that doesn't inspire actual conversation, and usually it says a lot about everyone involved with both woke and I would encourage somebody who wants to use the word woke, I would encourage you to specify what it is you have a problem with. Because when you label the entire category as woke, it's very easy to be like, oh, woke culture is ruining everything, okay? When you sit there and specify what is it about woke culture that you have a problem with, it suddenly becomes a lot harder to defend the thought process. It's easy to categorize woke things as like wokeness. And again, I grew up a certain way. I have certain thoughts. I am far from the most left-leaning person of anything. But I just think that it's so easy to denigrate wokeness when you're not addressing what it is you have a problem with. So I would say that when you say woke culture, Drone, and you don't have to get into it, I'm happy to have a private conversation too, I would encourage you to think about what is the wokeness that you didn't like and how can we address that? Because I think when you do it that way, there's actually an interesting conversation to be had too. That's the best part. You can actually have an interesting conversation. So for example, I'll give you one example just to make this a little easier. Woke culture could be the fact that a lot of movies are trying to sit there and say, hey, we have an IP here, and we're going to take that IP, and we're going to make all the main... actually, here's a great example. Okay? Assassin's Creed Shadows. Assassin's Creed Shadows has a black samurai as the main protagonist. I guarantee you, everyone on the far right is calling that woke culture. Like, you finally make an Assassin's Creed game in Japan, and you make the samurai black. Like, that's just a shout out to DEI. So try to figure out what it is you have a problem with and address those individual things instead of bundling them. Because I think we could have more interesting conversations that way. Because I think a lot of woke culture is caring about others, trying to promote others, trying to make it so that people have an easier time when they are part of marginalized conversations. And I think those are all good things. I think it's hard to say that you're against that. You can say you're against woke culture, it's far easier. It's hard to say you're against lifting up others and helping people who have had a harder time in life. But it is easier to have a conversation about, oh, okay, fine, but did we have to make the samurai black? Did we? Did we not? Like, I don't care. I'm going to enjoy the game either way. Like, I have no problem with it. But I think if we like specify where the issues are, we can have more reasonable conversations. Because I do believe that I personally have, I have disagreements with some things that would be categorized under woke culture. And I think woke culture encompasses a whole lot of things that are mostly good. That's why I'm trying to get into some of this. Alex, incorrect. I'm jumping to the bottom here. Alex, incorrect. The complaint from the right is not about a black samurai. That is the left's You're a Racist blame game. What the complaint was the fact that Yasuko was pushed as historical when it's not. Brian, I think that's BS. I think that's completely... I think that... I hear what you're saying, but I think we're playing a BS game here. The complaint was that's a black samurai. Then, Ubisoft then said, oh, well, you know, it's historical. Sure, that was... They shouldn't have leaned as hard into that aspect. But, like, again, the classic example is, you know, in Assassin's Creed 2, like, they fought... The assassin, whatever, Ezio fought the Pope. Like, nobody cares about the historical accuracy of Assassin's Creed. They care that it was a black samurai. And when they tried giving him a Middle Eastern accent, which is more historical, people fought back against that. There is racist culture out there, Brian. There is a degree of people just being upset that things aren't just straight white people all the time. And I even understand where it's coming from, but we at least have to acknowledge when we care and when we don't care. Okay, I'm going to go get caught back up again. This is getting more political than I thought. Sorry about that, but the word woke, I think the word woke, it just ruins conversations. It shuts down the conversation from both sides because we're not talking about the actual issues. Andy, which they won't. There's not cheap labor in the US. Exactly. Farmers are going to get destroyed. I don't know enough about the farmer stuff. I know nothing. I'm going to complain. I'm going to plead complete ignorance here. Last term, 92% of the tariffs went to bailing out the farmers. I'm not informed on that subject, and I try to only speak about things that I'm informed about. I try to. I'm not always right, but I try to. Chocobo, yeah, companies aren't going to build in the US unless the government gives them big incentives. Materials and labor is too expensive compared to China. I think there are structured ways you can do this. I think you can take tariffs from an industry and apply them towards rebuilding. I think there are ways to do this. I think the way it's being done kind of ruins the argument that that's the main goal or intent. I actually think the argument against reciprocal tariffs is a more interesting one because that's where broad stroke tariffs make more sense. The argument against bringing jobs back to the U.S., it's being done very poorly if that's the actual intent. Jacob Porter, these tariffs brought South Korea and Japan to align with China on this issue. Let that sink in. That is actually a big deal. John, Alex, if a pro for the tariffs is to drive mass manufacturing back to the US, do you think it's possible for US companies to develop the capability to competitively make these games, including miniatures? No. Every expert in the board game industry is of the opinion that the sheer cost to bring things back to the US properly, as well as the knowledge and expertise, you're talking about things where the cost is not sustainable and the knowledge is like 10 to 15 years away. So like I think every industry is different. The board game industry is just not poised for this to make sense from an economic perspective. Now, don't get me wrong. In the seeking out of greater economic benefit, there is an argument to be made that some industries will fail in the greater economic benefit. That is an argument you can have. I just don't think that's where this is overall. Andy, and the US taxpayer pays subsidies. Yes. Chocobo, there's some nice market adjustments happening. Ravensburger, for example, is shipping product to Canada from Europe starting this after next. Interesting. Masfigo, part of the point of the tariffs was to incentivize production in the US. Is CMON working on that? No, CMON does heavy miniature games. The US's manufacturing capabilities are primarily in like card-based games. You want to make a card-based game? That's where the US thrives. That's where they're best. Versus actually miniature production, that is almost entirely international. Very little is done in the US, if anything at all. We're just not good at that. Can that be done? Yes, but that's a very big time intensive. And again, this is where I'm leaning on experts in the industry as opposed to my own knowledge, but supposedly that is not something that's going to happen anytime soon. Arthur, honest question. What is the difference on the situation on US compared to what EU felt some years ago with VAT? In both cases, the consumer will pay significantly more for a game. I'm not as well informed about the VAT aspect of things. I just can't answer that as well. I'm not as well informed. The main issue I have here isn't the fact that a consumer has to pay more. That happened with COVID, and that sucks, and sometimes that happens when things happen. The main issue I have here is that this doesn't have to happen. Yes, the consumer paying more for a game is not the end of the world, but to what gain is the question. Because it's not just games, by the way. These tariffs are going to affect a whole lot of things. So the question is there a real benefit going on here? And I have a hard time seeing that, as do most economists. That's the tricky part. Almost every economist is like, this is bad. The market has reacted incredibly poorly. Like, billions of dollars of wealth have evaporated overnight. Cause, granted, can come right back. But, like, the market is not looking at this and being like, yay, Trump. Which the market did the last time he was president. The last time he was president, the market did react saying, yay, Trump. This time around, the market is like, oh, crap. Maybe the lady with the weird laugh wasn't so bad after all. That's what the market's doing right now. And the market is the people looking at this and saying, okay, this is bad for the economy. Meaning it's not you and I sitting and having a conversation. The overall market is like, oh boy, this is bad. That's a big indicator of things. Drone Explorer. I own 3 pairs of jeans, 3 pairs of sneakers, but I don't even know how many board games in my living room. I think about 100, not sure. Yeah, that's where the money's gonna come. ACS, I agree tariffs have more issues than resolutions. While it's not of age, I worry this is another pressure point to weaken worker safety regulations and worker rights in the US. Less regulations, more job for USA kind of thing. I'm not informed enough to have an opinion there. It's an interesting thought. First time I've heard it. Sugar Bill. The average American will be bearing the brunt of these tariffs, 100%. JF, I guess just ask US people for more payments. That's the easy solution. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say this as someone who lives in the US, unfortunately, but I think every board game creator that needs to charge US consumers more money for their game, do so. Like, absolutely. Like, don't hide the impact of where these things are. Like, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. But what's the other alternative? I mean, I sat there for who knows how long believing that the European consumer should pay VAT and not the American consumer. I feel bad for the consumer, but like, why should the US consumer pay for the Europeans' VAT? I think that's exactly true the reverse now. I'm consistent with my actions, or at least I try to be. The US consumer should pay the brunt of the tariffs. It should not be spread out across the project, in my opinion. Will that always happen? No, just like it didn't always happen last time with, again, VAT. But that's my overall thoughts on it. Okay. JF, I mean, US people will complain, but they can blame their president. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. It's easy to be pessimistic about the whole. I kind of am too and disagree on the tariffs, but with negotiations going on, some of these tariffs be a bluff per se, just trying to be optimistic. Yes, so I touched upon this in the beginning. I absolutely believe that these tariffs could be a bluff, and for one of 2 reasons. One is noble, and one is less so. The noble bluff would be, hey, this is just part of the economic back and forth, and we're trying to get them to lower their tariffs since this is part of the process. That is at least a noble bluff, so to speak. It's not necessarily a bluff. It's like, hey, here's tariffs, back off yours, back off ours, no problem. The less noble one, and this is something that I have no idea if it's true, but I have no problem believing it's true. But it's not crazy, because it's happened already with the last time there were tariffs. It's not crazy to announce tariffs, watch the market dip because the market doesn't like tariffs, to have, you and all your rich friends buy into the market, and then take off those tariffs, and the market jumps back up, and you just made a crap ton of money. Like, that's not crazy at all. In both cases, the end result is the tariffs are gone, which is at least good. Tariffs gone, good, this is good. But the problem is the instability that this causes, again, noble or not noble, the instability it causes is problematic. You can't run a company knowing that at any given point, this month the tariffs are on, this month the tariffs are off. You don't know what to charge people. You don't know how to plan. You don't know how to operate. Every single board game company right now, every single person who is involved in the finance of a board game company at this point is just trying to wait out the next 3.5 years and just hoping they can survive that long. Because you have no idea what's happening, and let's hope it's only 3.5 years. You have no idea what's actually going to happen. So the economic instability is already gone. There's nothing you can do to fix that right now except for time and patience. And so whether the tariffs go away, I hope the tariffs go away. I hope it's all bluff. I hope China lowers their numbers and we lower ours and it all works out. The economic instability is still there. And that makes it very hard for people to plan and price their games going forward. Anthony, with these tariffs, they need to remove income tax to counterbalance. That would be great. I'd be down for that. Oh my gosh, I'm behind. How far behind am I in chat? Okay, I'm gonna be back in chat soon. 1 second. Oh no, my battery is low. Okay, well if my laptop shuts off, I'll switch to my thing here. I am way behind on chat. Also, I have a very busy day today. Today's also the day I'm filming all these feast interviews for the GameFound Feast coming up. I don't know if it's public. There's a GameFound Feast coming up, I guess. Anyways, I mean, we do one every quarter. It's not that much of a surprise. But what's it called? So I have to leave on time today, unfortunately. The problem is that any argument raised by the government around tariffs is a false pretense. They want a hidden tax to justify their billionaire's cut. I believe that's absolutely possible. I do try to be very careful as to when we have evidence for a thing versus when it's possible. I have no problem believing the nefarious intent of the government or Trump. I have no problem believing that there's actually good intent. I lean a bit more to the former, but both are totally possible to me. Mike Young, anyone complaining about wokeness doesn't know what woke is. I think I mostly agree with that. I think that woke is often an umbrella term used to encompass some things that are reasonable, interesting conversations, and then it expands to include a bunch of things where you sound like an idiot if you say you have a problem with that. So like saying, again, like going back to the example I gave, saying that I'm against trying to give people opportunities to marginalized populations, that's something that's so hard to say you're against that. You sound like a bad person. But you could say I'm against wokeness and it's much easier. So I think that it is an umbrella term. And again, I think I am against some things that we categorize as woke. I am. I think that some things are stupid things to do or whatnot. Again, even using the Assassin's Creed example, I think they shouldn't have made a black samurai. I think it's stupid. I'll play the game and I don't care, and I won't go on a single internet forum complaining. But I do think, like, okay, fine, there was a black samurai that was marginally there. I think that was stupid. Do I care? No, I don't care. It's a friggin' board game. Like, again, you're fighting with the Pope. I don't care. But do I think it was pandering to an extent? Yeah, I think it was. But let's have a conversation about that and just that. And let's acknowledge where we actually care about things that are real and not. Like, okay, I don't want to get too off topic here. We're gonna come back to this. I'm gonna catch up to chat. Whatever. It is what it is. Jacob, chips already been made in the U.S. and incentives from the chips actually brought more of it here. Intel and TSMC were already building buildings. Yes, that's one of the things I'm talking about. Like, there were news articles talking about how, look, they're building a new thing because of the tariffs. No, they weren't. They were building that before the tariffs. Nothing to do with anything. I'm not saying the tariffs won't have some jobs that were brought here. I'm just saying there are jobs that were being brought here regardless of the tariffs that are being given credit to the tariffs, which I think that is wrong. Dylan Roth, I think tariffs are objectively a good idea when we're being tariffed by the same countries. It could lead to short-term pain but long-term gain in regards to deficit American production. I think it is possible. Dylan, I think that I don't think it's crazy. I think that's possible. I guess the way I personally would look at it is I like the price of goods the way things have been going until now, and I don't like the current shift, which is going to have a definite impact. And generally when prices go up, they very rarely go back down. So the prices that have to be raised to account for these new tariffs are unlikely to go down. So that short-term loss, long-term gain is going to be so much harder to measure. There's a reason most economists are against the tariffs, and there's a reason this can be pitched as like, well, from a mass stance, like, oh, these are good, this is fair for the U.S. So again, I'm not saying, I understand where you're coming from. That's the most credit I can give towards tariffs is that. I'm still against them, but I don't think it's a crazy stance. I understand where you're coming from. I still think it's not good for us. Sugarwell, I can't take anyone who just labels things they don't like as woke seriously at all. So I can, Sugarwell, and that's probably because I grew up conservative, and I think that I don't think, to be clear, I don't think growing up conservative is bad, and I don't think growing up liberal is bad. I think I think the left has a lot of things they can do that would be a lot better. I think the right has a lot of things they can do that would be a lot better. When I say I grew up conservative, all I really mean is the idea, if you rewind 10 years, the idea of me calling things woke wouldn't have been crazy. Like, you grow up a certain way, you grow up surrounded by certain ideologies, and this goes for both sides, and you get sheltered into those ideologies, and you sit there stuck on the things that you think and the things that are easy to bundle and label, and you don't think of yourself as wrong. You latch on to the things that are reasonable. Like, you latch on to reasonable conversations. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this stupid black samurai thing, but you latch on to that and you're like, why does it have to be a black samurai? And I think it's a reasonable conversation until you kind of have a different conversation where you're like, okay, but does it matter? Like, sure, you're right. I'm not, again, I think it is right. I think it's a stupid thing to do, but also I think Ezio fought the Pope again. So like, it's just, you get stuck in these categories, and it's easy to diminish things so many ways. I could go on about this all day long. I am very sympathetic to anyone being entrenched in viewpoints that they haven't had a chance to truly challenge. And a lot of that comes down to the people you surround yourself with and how life changes. Like, I think my viewpoints changed over time because I stopped being surrounded by one exact group of people that had the exact same opinion. And so for me, it's not about not taking them seriously. It's about, have you ever really thought about what you're saying? Like, have you really thought through what you're saying and the impact and all of that, or not so much? Because, by the way, just for the record, I think both things are true too. I think labeling everything as woke is not great. I think the reverse is true. Labeling everything as fascist is not great. I read an interesting article once that really, I love this article. I've been trying to find this article for years. I've never been able to find it. But it was an article talking about things, it was talking about the rise of Trump to a certain extent. It was talking about how it gave all these examples of like these terrible things, and like he did this, and he's terrible, offensive to women, and he did that, and he's this, and he's fascist, and all these different labels. And you think he's talking about Trump, and they're like, no, that was all stuff said about, was it John Kerry? No, who was it was a previous Republican candidate that like barely, like nobody would really think he's a bad person at all, comparatively speaking. And it was talking about how when you sit there and you apply extreme labels to things on a regular basis, you desensitize people to those extreme labels. I think that the right has been used to being called fascist people who hate women and everything for years. So like when Trump came along, that name calling was desensitized. So I think calling everything woke is not great. I think calling everything fascist is not great. I think we have to be like specific about the things we actually have problems with as opposed to broad strokes. Bum Fuzzle, very happy with Trump. No issues here. I mean, I disagree, but you're not giving me enough to work with. So, again, no blame. Like, different viewpoints. I'm fine with that. I just personally disagree. Ryan, Alex, incorrect. We covered that. Chocobo, you have no issues with your Department of Education being dismantled. Your president advertising Teslas. So, Chocobo, so again, even this is an example. I think if we want to encourage conversation, it's more nuanced than that, because both sides have gotten very good at diminishing the entire conversation to one talking point. Like if someone said I have no problem with Hillary, someone would say like, what, so you have no problem with her email server or whatever? Like you can diminish it it's a straw man argument. You sit there and say, you pull this one thing up and you say, well, you have to have a problem with that. Now again, between you and I think I am not thrilled with Trump as a president or person. But I think that it's more meaningful to engage into a conversation as to, well, do you have any problems with Trump, and what do you like about Trump? That's a much more interesting conversation because it forces the person to engage with what they do have a problem with. Because I think it's totally reasonable. Like, I think it's reasonable for somebody to say, oh, I think Trump is terrible here, 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 here. I think they're good here, 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 here. I think you can vote for a person as the sum of their parts because we have a two-party system, which is not great. So I think it's more meaningful to engage into like an actual conversation as opposed to just, picking things that are easy to fight and saying, what, you have no problem with those things, if that makes sense. JF, EU pays higher taxes nowadays, so US people will have to pay tariffs as well, even if paid but undelivered Kickstarters. Jared, there's a correction period. When implementing tariffs and the economy was previously based in the US being at disadvantages, the economy will boom by the end of the year. Jared, I hope to God you're right. That's all. I hope you're right. Mass Vigo, why are we spending $600 to $1,000 all in anyway? That's a great question. It's a great question. Also, it's meaningless here. If you have a problem with how much someone's spending on a board game for any reason, that is totally fine. But you can't kind of bundle this into that and say, well, you shouldn't have been spending that anyway. Because that, practically speaking, you can make an argument in any capacity. I could steal $1,000 from you and say, like, legitimately, meaning if that's the argument on the table, I could steal $1,000 from you and say, you probably shouldn't be buying $1,000 board games anyway. Those are two separate conversations. The reasonableness of a purchase and whether something that adds a giant tax onto everyone, totally separate conversations, and they should remain separate. Dylan Roth, I think things only going well in terms of our space. They certainly aren't going well for the national deficit. Yeah, you know what? Honestly, I don't disagree with the general national deficit. I think the average American consumer voted Trump in because of the price of eggs. No one cared about the national deficit. They cared about the price of eggs. And then the price of eggs is not going down. The price of board games is going up. So again, like the big thing, Dylan, here's what I'll ask you. Same question, or anyone defending this. The main question I'll ask, I asked at the beginning of the call, if you were pro-Trump, and if the Biden administration were doing the exact same things, would you, if Kamala was doing the exact same things, would you be as equally defensive or not? Would you be screaming about how she's ruining the country, or would you be giving her all the grace and credit that you are now? That's the biggest indicator, because I guarantee you I'd be going after them left, right, and center the same way. Like, I would be equally against it. So focus on try to question whether you'd be against the same actions from the other party or for the same actions. Are you treating them the same, or are you treating them differently because of the party? That's the main question I'm curious about. Mark, if board games are produced in the US, every game will be as priced as Food Chain Magnet? Yes, 100%. 100%. I don't even need to finish what you're saying. 100%. Eddie, yes, the largest economy in the world was at a disadvantage. Yeah. Yes, Eddie. Mikey, as soon as your argument goes the left, you know they don't know what you're talking about. Brian, correct, but in AC2, they said it was fictional. The difference was UB published it as fact when it wasn't. So, Brian, this is where I might be misinformed. My understanding of the historical nature of it is that there is truth to it. Not that it's not true, but they oversold how prevalent it was, if that makes sense. Meaning, not that I could be wrong. My understanding is that there was truth, but they oversold how relevant it was. Either way, I do agree it was a mistake on their part to defend it. I think the initial outrage that happened was not because Ubisoft defended it. The initial outrage was because it was there at all. And that's the interesting part to me. ACS, the problem is once you say things because it's historical and it's not, that's just lying. Sure, but again, maybe I'm misinformed. My understanding of the ACS thing is that the AC thing is that they oversold it, and again, the initial outrage was before that was being sold. Ben Fuzzle, go investigate what the Department of Education is being disbanded before speaking. My son just got a scholarship to a university with many grants. What's the problem? Bumfuzzle, that's not a fair stance at all. You can't sit there and say, well, I haven't lost a job, so therefore everyone else who lost their job doesn't exist. You have to look at the larger picture of things. Now, again, I'm not as well informed in the Department of Education. I guess we're shifting away from tariffs here, but it is what it is. My overall 2 cents on the Doge and the dismantling of a whole lot of things is I actually think there's reasonable conversations to be had about government waste. I really, really genuinely do. I think the way Doge is handling things is they're just dismantling as much as possible and doing so very aggressively in a way that is kind of irresponsible. Could it save them a lot of money? Yes. Have they also mispublished things in terms of how much they're saving and had $8 million turned into $8 billion? Yeah, there's definitely a lot of misreporting going on. So I think that I'm not as well informed on each individual thing that's being broken down by Doge, so I don't have a strong opinion. The only opinion I have is it seems irresponsible. Perceptually, it seems irresponsible, the speed at which it's happening. The idea of it is great. Government has a lot of waste in spending, absolutely. But yeah. Okay. Let's see. Eddie, saying to investigate stuff and using it as evidence. Maybe you should do some research. Eddie, I agree with you, but just softer. Serve me. You want to have a conversation about tariffs and you're surprised the conversation got political? No, not at all. I said at the beginning that it's going to get political. I knew it was going to get political. I think it got more political than I was expecting. But I definitely knew that it would get political because it's about tariffs. So it's more the speed and the shifting list that I might... maybe that's on me. That's on me. Okay. Oh my gosh, we're so behind. Oh my gosh. John, how many small farmers are left in the U.S.? Isn't it all... I don't know anything about this. I can't answer. David K. Companies won't invest huge sums to build factories. Tariffs might be modified downwards. If tariffs might be modified downwards or rescinded at any time. That's a good point, David. That's a good point. If you know that the tariffs are all over the place as they have been so far, there's less incentive to make massive industry changes because of potentially temporary tariffs. That's a fascinating point. I had not given that any thought. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Jared, the thing being overlooked is many of these countries have already lowered the tariffs based on the implementation of tariffs, which is a win. I don't know the data on that, but again, once again, I'll say that is the main argument I can give for tariffs, so I'll give credit where credit is due, and I have to look into more, but in theory, I would give credit where credit is due. Chugwell, DOE helps many schools in poor areas. It's nice that doesn't affect you, but you should care about the rest of your country. Agreed on that. T2, I refunded a Veil fake game of 72 and they added 92 for what they said were tariffs. Yeah, that's what they should do. They should charge more, and that's what it is. John, can we make board games in the US and just leave the mini manufacturing in China, then assemble in the US and only pay tariffs on the value assigned to the mini? Possibly. I'm not well versed enough on this side of things to answer that. That is a possible. My guess is it still would be a huge pain. Again, it's not that China is good at miniatures. It's that the U.S. is only good at cards. Like cards is the only thing the U.S. is really has any degree of larger scale board game manufacturing in. But okay, where am I? Old man yelling at cardboard. This is a hidden way to tax everyone without the backlash of not increasing tax only the wealthy. I mean, I think there's a little backlash. Lauren, I'd be curious how concerned you think we should be about CMON being suspended from the Hong Kong index. Great question. Also a little less. So I think I've covered this already. This we already knew was coming. It was already announced. I think you should always only back a game if you're okay never seeing that game. Like you just have to. That's just the way it works. That said, usually your risk is like less than 1% based on how many board game campaigns fail. I would personally say that if you're backing a CMON campaign right now, given the reported $2 million loss and the being suspended, the suspended part, they're like, oh, we don't have enough, our finance department is lower. My personal guess is that, be a little bit warier. You know, put it, instead of saying there's a 1% chance of losing that CMON campaign, say there's a 10% chance. I do think you should be more wary. I also think it's probably fine. This has happened before in the past with CMON specifically, and everything was fine. This doesn't mean that they are going to go belly up at all. It is more red flags. So I do think you should be more mindful how many CMON campaigns and assign a 10 to 20% risk estimate. I'm making those numbers up, but I'm just saying that's what I would do on my end. I would just assign a higher risk estimate as to how much I care. So it's probably fine. The sky is probably not falling, but for every 10 times the sky is probably not falling, one of those times it actually does fall. So that's the way I'd put it. Swebby, why do we want manufacturing to return to the US? We've evolved into a service economy. Unemployment is very low. Swebby, good point. For a second, I don't mean any offense to this, but Americans are shockingly uneducated. The education divide in America is somewhat immense, with only a small part of the population actually having a good education when compared to Europe. I work as a researcher at a top university, and every well-educated person knows and can see what an idiot Trump is. I'm trying to think if there's a way. I'm not going to respond to that because I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but thank you for your contribution. I'm not disagreeing. I'm not agreeing. I just don't want to get too sidetracked. I'm trying to lean a bit back. Jared, take some time from the after correction using the Tarriffs. People are so focused on the here and now and freaking out incorrectly. I'm pausing because I'm processing. So the price of eggs. The price of eggs is an interesting one, Jared, because the price of eggs right now is seeing a massive spike, partially because of bird flu and disease and having to, cull the population to a degree, lowering the availability. To a large extent, people say Trump was elected over the price of eggs. The price of eggs is a temporary issue. The groceries are going up, things are going up, inflation is real, but the volume spike in the price of eggs, which is not inflation, that was a specific situation around a specific issue that caused that to be more massively inflated than other areas, caused a whole lot of people to freak out and vote for the other party who would promise them the lower price of eggs. I think a lot of people have a hard time paying their bills. And so I think it is a reality that short-term ways and things that make those lives harder are going to impact change. I do agree that there's a larger adjustment on the market, short-term in tariffs, and we'll see what happens down the road. But I think, again, the biggest thing I'll say, Jared, is it's hard to find economists who think this is a good idea. And so, I have my own armchair paperbacking, my armchair quarterback, armchair quarterbacking, that's called paperbacking. Too many things in my mind. I have my own armchair quarterbacking where I can argue for the reciprocal tariff aspect. But the thing I'm challenged by the most is that it seems hard to find economists who think it's a good idea. When all of the experts in a field, and genuinely look into it, send me emails at alex@boardgamepro.com. If you find someone, let me know, because I've looked and I haven't found it. Maybe I haven't looked hard enough. That's entirely possible. When the experts in a field all believe that something is bad, that's the biggest thing for me. That's more so than my own thoughts, more so than my own opinions. It's hey, can we find 20% of people who say that it's good from the experts in this kind of stuff? Because I don't think we can. That's the thing I struggle with the most. And so I'm curious if you find that, Jared, because I try. When I say I try to understand all sides, I really do. And so I try to come at it from it's hard when you're okay, maybe there's people in office who really have a game plan. Maybe they really know what's going on. But then where are the people who are saying that this is a good idea? Where are the people who are defending that in any way? Where are the people who think this works out? Because I don't see them. I just see the decisions and not the experts behind those decisions, if that makes sense. David, speaking of the equity markets, now might be a time to short stocks before the true bottom hits, still not the bottom, and then to buy the dip at the bottom. David, I've debated this. I've debated, do I buy a bunch of stocks before he takes the tariffs away and it goes back up? I don't know. I don't know where the bottom is. I don't know how to play that game. I'm not an expert. I'm just living through it. John, Lauren, it's probably a no-go topic for Alex because of the job. He's pretty open to everything, but that may be touchy for him. John, not at all. John, check out my weekend reviews. I don't shy away from things. I specifically, again, every time, whenever someone watches my videos and goes, hey, you're a CMO of GameFound, why are you doing X, Y, and Z? Sure, I get it. I do. But I also don't actually shy away from things at all. I will review a GameFound campaign and say that the game is, okay at best, and I will review a GameFound campaign and say it's amazing. Ultimately, I'm just here to give you my thoughts and opinions and hope that over time, people who watch enough of my stuff, will I sit here and say you should be more wary of CMON campaigns? Absolutely! Because I'd be stupid not to. So does it mean that sky is falling? No. And the last time this happened, I said the exact same thing. I'm generally I try to be consistent. It's the only thing you have going for you in this world is consistency. Because you can have your opinions, but as soon as you're inconsistent about them, that's where it all falls apart. That's why I talk about like looking at, would you be equally gracious to both sides? Would you be equally harsh to both sides? Consistency is where you see whether someone acts. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not shying away from that. Bumfuzzle, the lady with the bad laugh was a bad idea. Bumfuzzle, that's not an argument, dear Lord. Okay, Bumfuzzle, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I may not bother responding to you further than this because so far you're like, I like Trump. The lady with the bad laugh was a bad idea. Those aren't great arguments in my opinion. And you're still welcome to all your opinions and your thoughts and all that. I just don't know if I feel the need to engage with that. Sergio, is it finally the print and play age? We'll find out, but I will enjoy every single game on these shelves again and again and again before I dive into print and plays. I just don't like print and plays, so I don't think the market is there for that. I think there's too many board games. Brian, because it's unsustainable, COVID showed how bad that was when we couldn't get goods from overseas. I just need to care about the environment. You should produce in the US. David, less minis and more standees for cost considerations. Yeah, that's true. John, David, you're probably right, but that's a bummer for those of us who love to paint miniatures. What about those of us who love to pretend that we'll eventually paint the miniatures? Brian, describe me environmentally. There are more protections for the factories. You don't deal with shipping, which contributes greatly to pollution. David, yes, suboptimal solution. Also, 156, and I'm really have to go. Okay, I'm gonna scroll through. I'm gonna start skipping things. Okay, voting for Trump had very little to do with tariffs for me. I've been very cautiously optimistic. Not impressed yet. Appreciate that. Drone Explorer regarding woke, not about wokeness itself. It's an amount of it that was forcibly shoved down the throat. I'm no racist or hater, to each their own. I'm happy to have a conversation on a one-to-one basis. I really do think. I think it's such a complicated conversation, and I'm not pandering when I say I understand where you're coming from. I think, at least I think I do. But I also think that there's a lot of looking at the situations and trying to figure out what you actually care about or not. And there's things I care about, and there's things that I don't. And I've strongly separated those. Okay, let me scroll down. I'm just scrolling at this point. I'm skipping comments because I have 2 minutes. Okay. David K., I respect the channel is willing to engage in discussing these polarizing topics. We need more dialogue without the trolling. David, I try. I never know if it's a good idea or not. I really don't. Even now, I do fear I've shifted this a bit more to political to a degree. But successful. Thank you for 26 months. I appreciate it. But I don't like the idea of hiding real conversations or anything like that for the sake of, not offending anyone. But and I don't mean that because there's lots of people who are like, I'm just here to offend people because I'm going to be real and straight. That's not what I mean. But yes, I will upset some people with my opinions. Yes, I will not be too much one way or too much. The things will happen and people will hopefully talk. And I try to keep things as level as possible. I try to validate where I can. I understand where people are coming from most of the time. Not always. There are times I tap out because I'm just not getting enough out of it. But I try, and I hope I'm not making mistakes. Okay. I want to engage in so many of these things. I'm trying to. I promise I have 3 minutes left, so I'm trying to be mindful here. Okay. There's a lot of political stuff here. Lots of stuff I want to engage. I'm trying to get to the bottom here. Okay. Connie Vogelman. Oh, hi, Connie. I'm a Fed and I'll flag that most of the savings are canceled contracts. It's literally just the government not paying the bills, including for work already performed. Yeah, I have looked into that stuff. So the reported numbers, I am aware that a large amount of them are hey, we paid you for it, and now we're just not doing it. I do think there are savings. Make no mistake. I think if you look at all the numbers, you can break it down and pull out half of it as canceled contracts, misreported numbers. Sure, are there savings? Yes. Do those savings mean it's a good thing? That's far more complicated. Brad, 100% agree that government waste should be the discussion focus right now. Today's about the tariffs. We tangented onto the government waste aspect. Okay. I'm just catching up. Morganite, as someone who works in healthcare, the science and medical trial gutting is terrifying. The number of cancer patients we're seeing is skyrocketing, and I'm seeing people in their early 30s instead of 50s. Yeah, specifically anything health related, that's honestly where I have the most. I don't, again, I'm not as well versed in any of the individual areas of things that were cut. I do think, like, the Department of Education, I genuinely have no idea what they do. I have no idea. I'm not saying they should cut or shouldn't cut. I'm saying I, as an ignorant person on the sidelines, have never looked into it. Maybe there's a huge savings. Maybe it makes no difference. I have no idea. The things that make me nervous are the healthcare stuff. I'm like, the healthcare stuff seems to be nervous. Also, like, there's reports, this is a side fun fact for you, there's reports that, there's estimates are that tax fraud is going to be up this year. Like, people are reporting higher credits or not reporting the tax at all because of the perception of just lower availability. I've been waiting on a freaking piece of paper from the IRS for like 6 months now that like usually takes 2 months to get here, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. So that's also going to be lost revenue for the government if that's true. Although, again, it's a little crazy out there right now. It's a little crazy, but. Joe White, I have an issue with board game companies and crowdfunding taking their time developing projects and delivering on time. Once again, the backers take all the risk. I think a lot of companies do deliver on time-ish. I think some definitely drag it out, and it is true that when things drag out, these problems, which didn't have to exist. Like, if you have a tariff situation to a game that's 2 years late, that didn't have to be a problem. Now it is. It's very sucky. It's very sucky for, like, I understand. Yeah, it's just very sucky all around. Okay, Dark Acid, the war against science is what we're seeing. It's a whole conversation I'm not going to get into right now. It's not a lack of willingness. It's a lack of time. I'm over. Okay, I have to go. I'm sorry. Let's see. Scrolling. Successful. I like discussion with Alex, especially when we disagree, because I always learn something. Aw, you're a sweetheart. Yeah, the biggest thing, if anyone who knows me on a personal level, like, my opinions have changed drastically. Not drastically, that's not true. My opinions have changed over the years, and they've adjusted, and they've changed, and they constantly will. Like, I will learn new things, I will hear new things. That's always the case. But I often try to do that by not escalating to a non-conversational point. That's the tricky part. I try to bring things to a point where we can actually have a conversation, and I'm sure I've offended people over the years. I'm sure I'll offend people in the future, but I also do try to listen, and life's hard, man. Life's hard. We don't need to make it harder. Okay, Brian, Alex takes complicated 4-hour conversations, tries to cover an hour. You can't talk that fast, Alex. Brian, you're not wrong. I wish I could do this all day. This has been a very engaging chat. I've been enjoying this thoroughly. The amount of times I've had to skip through to the end and just not, I think this might be the first time. I usually just rush through all the last thingies. I've had to skip tons of stuff over here, and I feel bad with that. I would do this all day. I just sadly have things to do that I'm 2 minutes late to. I'm going to respond to discuss our last comment, and too many people tie their opinions and what they know to their identity instead of being open to learning and growing and knowing it's okay to have been wrong. I think that's 1,000,000% true. If there's one takeaway for this entire conversation that I could ever ask you to be mindful and consider, is any time you criticize a party, and this is going to be a political sentence to a degree, but it applies to other things too. If you're ever going to criticize a party for doing something, would you criticize your party for doing the same thing? If you're ever going to praise or excuse your party for doing something, would you praise or excuse the other party for doing the same thing? This goes on both sides. This is not just an anti-Trump thing. This is really, really not. It goes on both sides. Look at the actions and try to be mindful of the actions and not the person taking those actions. Don't tie your opinions to your identity. Actually have opinions. Actually think them through. Think through what makes sense to you, and then question them. And by the way, I think it's okay to support a candidate who you don't agree with them on everything. I really do. I don't think you have to justify everything your party or candidate does. I think you could say, hey, I still think this is my preferred candidate for reasons X, Y, and Z, but I don't like this. That will allow you to develop a degree of nuance as opposed to having to, confirmation bias everything that ever happens. Anyways, I gotta go. I appreciate all of you. I wish I could keep going. This has been absolutely delightful. You are all lovely people, and I thank you for engaging. I appreciate being willing to talk. I appreciate that most of this has been fairly conversational and fairly being willing to engage in conversation. Definitely there were a few moments that drifted to slightly less conversational, slightly more whatever, but I appreciate all of you. So thank you for being there. Anyways, love you all. And really, really have a good one. Like, I don't know what to say. It's a tough world out there. Hopefully this all bounces back. Hopefully everything's going to be okay. I don't believe it's the end of the world. I believe it's just, not the best. But I'm going to go turn things off and then apologize to my next call for being 4 minutes late. Enjoy.